Welcome to Quality Time with MoreSteam. I am your host, Dan Swartwout, and today we are lucky enough to be joined by Ryan C. Weiss. Ryan is the author of Optics, Align People and Process to Accelerate Performance. He is also the host of the Optics in Action podcast. I will have links to both of those in the show notes. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I am excited to be here.
Ryan, there are so many things I want to talk to you about, especially about the optics system. Your new book, it just came out this year, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just launched earlier this year.
And I know it's been a tremendous success from the reviews I have read online, and I've had the chance to go through the book myself. So I'm very excited to talk to you about that. But before that, I want to get into your background because you have a very interesting background. You grew up in Elgin, Illinois, correct?
That's right. Yeah. I grew up here and kind of moved back to the area about 6 or 7 years ago. But along the path, as you've noted, I moved a bunch of times to foreign countries and all around the world. So,
Elgin, Illinois. One of the things that I have found out about you, and you still mention to this day, and it still exists to this day, so you must be very proud of it, the lawn mowing business you started when you were a teenager, right?
oh, absolutely. Yeah. My youngest brother still owns that business today and has really transformed it into a highly successful organization. They've got multiple locations. They've got 50 some trucks all over the
Wow.
Chicagoland area doing fertilizer, mosquito control. I mean, they're actually just knocking it out of the park. So that was a company I started to pay my way through college. That was like my dad wanted me to go to college, but he's like, Ryan, you got to figure out how to pay for it. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to pay for it. So I started that company when I was really 16 years old, I'll really say. I got a 1981 Toyota Corolla Tercel, a tiny little car, and I was putting a lawnmower in the trunk of that thing. I had a weed whacker and a blower in the back seat, and I was off and running. And that's where I first started my entrepreneurial journey.
Now, when most people think of teenagers and lawn mowing businesses, they think of, I'm going to mow some lawns in the neighborhood. But you were beyond that. You had corporate customers, you had commercial customers. How did you get that as a teenager where you're going to maybe a commercial property owner and saying, trust me as a teenager to do this for you? I am reliable. I will get this done.
Yeah. Well, I started figuring out like places like banks wanted their place to look really nice. And so I figured out if I bought insurance and I had, a logo and stuff like those types of things on the truck, I needed to look presentable starting in that 1981 Toyota Corolla Tercel, obviously I was like going around and doing whatever I could. But as it evolved, starting to get banks and starting to get these bigger clients, I had to go and figure out how I was going to get insurance, how to do taxes, how to hire employees, how to do all of those things. So that was probably one of the most valuable experiences early in my life to start figuring out how that stuff worked and really started laying the foundation for everything I did after that.
You're running the business. You graduate from high school. You go to Eldon Community College, where you were a student trustee on the board of trustees. Tell me about that. How did that come about? And
Yeah.
what were your responsibilities as a student trustee?
So I was just so full of energy and trying to figure out kind of the way the world worked. And so that first year at Elgin Community College, I got involved in kind of student government. I'm running my business. The reason I chose the community college, I got free tuition and I could keep running my business. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to figure this out for a couple of years, keep making some money, putting money in the bank, and then figure out what I'm going to do afterwards. And so I went there for those couple of years and I started getting involved, figured out that I could be the student member of the board of trustees. I was like, I don't even know what that means, but that sounds pretty cool and interesting. So got really involved, ran for that, and started getting exposed to the government and how things operate in the government and how things happen in the board of trustees who are really setting the policies and stuff for the school. So it was a great experience at a young age to be exposed to that. I didn't really have much influence I've got lots of stories about that, but but I learned a lot along the way. And I think
Right.
early in our lives, if we can be surrounded by people who can challenge us, who can, coach us, who can give us feedback, and if we can be humble enough to listen and understand, some of those experiences really shaped the way I went into my corporate career and then back as an entrepreneur.
You were elected by your fellow students to be a
That,
trustee?
that's right. Yes, sir.
Did you have competition or were you the only one on the ballot?
I did have competition, and that was a really interesting experience to sort of navigate and figure out what that looked like and how to run a campaign at a community college where there's a very diverse student body, and there are all these things to try to take into consideration. So definitely an interesting learning experience for sure.
What was your biggest takeaway from running that campaign? I mean, obviously, when you run a campaign, you find some things work, some things don't work, and you continue along the lines of things that work. It's very much like continuous improvement.
That's right. So I think a lot of it was, for me personally, it was bringing some passion to the table, really saying, "Hey, I just want to see what I can do to help and to learn and understand and support the students and figure out how can I help influence the conversation around that." And so it was a lot of just being who I am and talking to people to understand what different students' needs were. Like, different students. A community college has such diversity in terms
Right.
of mid-career professionals or people coming back into the workforce trying to, maybe get a degree that they never got, or changing careers, or really going after their first certification in the middle of their life. And then there were people like me who were straight out of high school who are trying to get a foundation for what we were going to do. So starting to learn about some of that and the diversity of people who attend community, like I've become very passionate even in my later life or midlife maybe, of community college play a really important role in
Definitely.
in our culture and in
Right.
society. And I think sometimes they get negative connotations of, oh, that kid didn't go away to college or whatever. But look, with the student debt crisis we've got today, with all of these things, I've encouraged my own children, like, go to a community college, get a couple of years of figuring out, get your general ed, like figure out what you want to do with your life. And I think that has a really somewhat negative connotation in much of our society. And I think it's really incredibly disappointing. We've even had folks come up to my wife and say, well, why is your son going to community college? He's, he got straight A's, he's doing all these things. And, why doesn't he go away to college? And I think that it's really unfortunate because people have this perception that in order to be successful, you've got to go straight away to a 4-year university, get this degree, do that. I'm like, we've lived in 3 different countries. I've started multiple successful entrepreneurial ventures. I worked for a Fortune 500 company managing a $500 million global technology portfolio. Like, what part of that was restricted by the fact that I went to a community college? And so I appreciate you bringing that up and asking these questions, because I am really passionate about the need for these in our society and the cultural change around perceptions of what these are and what it means. They're not going to hold you back in terms of successful careers. I don't know anything I would have done differently if I'd gone straight to a 4-year university and didn't start my business and didn't do these things. I have no idea what would have been different. I don't imagine it would have been so much greater than it is today.
I think too, with the community colleges now, they are so streamlined. You go, you get your prerequisites, you save money, maybe you figure out what it is you love, what your passion is, so that you can go straight to a university if you choose to, where you've got those prerequisites filled and you're ready to start into your major. I think it makes a lot of sense.
That's right. 100%.
You gave a graduation speech at your community college there at Elgin Community College. Do you remember what your graduation speech was about?
You know what? I wish, wow, if I would have been a little more prepared, I would have actually gone back and found the poem that I wouldn't give you the whole poem, but there was a poem that I read, and it was about basically living life prophylactically. Like, saying, hey, we could go through life and try to plan everything out and try to figure everything out and always carry an umbrella. And like, we could go through life that way, or we can figure out like, I want to go through life learning and growing, and I'm going to make some mistakes along the way. And I certainly have, and figure things out as we go and view it as an adventure, view it as an exploration. And, man, I wish I could have that poem on the top of my tongue, but it was really about that life, let's view life as an adventure. And I was pretty young at the time. I had done a few things, but I had so much to learn. And so as I look back at that, I'm like, wow, you're bringing up some great memories.
Next time you're on the show, bring the poem and we can do it. We can hear it then.
I'm
'Cause
going to find
excited
it.
to hear this.
I will find it.
You graduated from Elgin Community College. You went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. You're the second recent guest who went to the University of Illinois. Meredith Brody, who's just on the show, went there, had a great time at the University of Illinois.
Go Illini. I'm going to have to connect with her.
She's over at Constellation. It's a great episode. One of the things that I am curious about, because you've had such an interesting career path, everything I found about you said that you wanted to go into medicine. You wanted to go into medicine. You went to Illinois where you got a degree in chemistry. Everything I found about you from your early days was medicine. And then you did a complete 180 and went to Kansas and got an MBA in finance. What changed for you from this path to medicine that you were seemingly on from such a young age to move in this other direction?
Wow. So, wow, you are bringing up some real history here. So, yeah, I was at the University of Illinois. I was like on track. I'm like, I'm going to get my degree in chemistry. I'm going to go to medicine, exploring that. My grandmother, so for most of my growing up years, so she actually passed away while I was at the University of Illinois from breast cancer. And the technology—
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. So the technology in terms of cancer and the way they treat cancer and stuff has evolved so much in the last, that's been 25 plus years ago. At the time, she was, so most of my childhood, for 14, 15 years, she battled cancer, and she passed away when I was 20 years old. And so that played a significant role of just my childhood, seeing her go through that, seeing that. And so that was something that was sort of compelling me in that direction. But when I went to the U of I, being the person that I am, I was like, I got to the U of I, I'm going for a degree in chemistry, I'm thinking about medicine. The first thing I did when I got down there was I said, I'm going to go work at a hospital. And so I went and got a job at a local hospital in Champaign. And I was like, I'll start at whatever level. I went from running a business, making really good money, to basically an entry-level position, cleaning bedpans, cleaning patients' rooms, doing those type of things. Because I said, if this is really what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, go into medicine, then I want to explore it. I want to understand what it's all about. Mm-hmm. Up until that point, I really hadn't done anything in medicine other than observing what my grandmother was going through. So for 2 years, I worked evenings, I worked night shift, I worked weekends at the hospital, and I worked my way up very quickly. I went from, cleaning patients' rooms to monitoring all the hearts on the heart floor and, sitting there and entering in medications and all these things. And I was like, am I really passionate about medicine, or where do I want to go with my career? And along the way, I met my wife, got married, decided after school, I'm like, you know what? I'm not really going to go into medicine. I'm much more interested by finance and business, and started working in the chemical industry and spent a good chunk of my career in the chemical industry. So I made kind of a pretty significant shift there, but it was along the way, exploring what do I want to do and learning along the way.
Did you find that having the hard science background helped you in the chemical industry, even though you were on the finance side?
Well, I had quite a few different roles in the chemical industry. And so the company that I worked for went through a couple of acquisitions. They moved me 7 times in 17 years. So they moved us to Asia and back twice. And There were some roles that I had that were chemistry related. There were other roles that I had that were very much finance related. And there were other roles that I had that were very much sales and business development related. So I started getting exposed to all of these different roles. And one of the things I sort of joke about is they kept moving me, trying to find something I would succeed at because we would do this. But it was really, I viewed every one of them as a learning experience. I'm like, I want to keep learning because there's some really cool stuff in all of those areas, from business development to people management and leadership to technology and technical leadership and understanding the importance of the stuff that we're selling and the impact on sustainability and all those things. So it had some impact. I was not really a hardcore chemist. I didn't pursue a PhD in chemistry or doctorate in chemistry, anything like that. I was much more interested in the way people work and the way processes work and how do you create systems that enable success. And so in every one of those different roles, I was learning about those things.
We could talk about your corporate experience for quite some time because many different roles, different countries that I'm sure shaped some of your later thinking, some of your later process thoughts. But I want to jump ahead a little bit. So you've gone through the corporate experience and you want to return to your entrepreneurial roots. You want to return to when you were 15, 16 with that Toyota and the lawnmower in the trunk. And that's when you start in 2016, Effective Performance Strategies. Tell us about the lead up to that. What got you thinking about that? Was it scary? Was it, how prepared were you? What were some things that you were thinking about? Because that's a huge leap. You're a big, big success in the corporate world. Then you go out on your own, probably thinking, I've got these systems and strategies I want to share with the world.
Yeah. Looking back, right? Look at the time, I was looking at it through the lens of I've been successful in the past. I've started a business in the past. I think I can do this again. And I was a bit naive, and it's probably good that I was,
Right.
because starting a business at that point was very different. I had, as you mentioned, I mean, I had lived in Singapore. I had lived in the Philippines. I had teams of people. There were all these things that I had started to become comfortable with. And when I was 16 years old with a Toyota Corolla Tercel, I had nothing to lose. I had nothing. I was trying to make something of myself. When I was 40 years old, and not to say that's old or anything like that, but I had become
You got responsibilities.
I had responsibilities, a wife and 4 children.
Yes.
I had a house and the cars and things to take care of. And all of a sudden I'm making this leap and walking away from monthly salary, bonuses, international living allowances, all these types of things.
Benefits?
Benefits. And I'm like, I'm going to figure out how to pay my own health insurance. I'm going to figure out how to start over. And I would admit, looking back on it, at the time, I was a bit naive about how hard the journey was going to be because I was more comfortable in the way things were than I was when I was 16. So going into it, I was like, I figured this out before. We're going to figure it out again. There's one thing I'll share, one little story I'll share about the corporate to entrepreneurial transition. And that was, at the time, Fitbits were kind of a big deal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And during my time in the Philippines, right before I left to become an entrepreneur, I had some heart problems, like some chest pain. And I went to visit a doctor in the Philippines. And this plays into the continuous improvement journey here. I went to visit this doctor, and there's this Filipino doctor sitting behind a desk, and he says, "What brings you into my office today?" I said, "Well, I'm having some chest pains." And he said, "Oh, okay. Tell me about your job. Is it stressful?" And I said, "No, I manage 180 people on night shift, but these are great people. They are such great people. I'm having the time of my life. It's so much fun." And he says, "Oh, interesting. How much coffee do you drink?" And I said, "Well, I drink couple Americanos a lot of times during the night because there's a Starbucks on the first floor and it's night shift. I'm trying to stay awake. So I drink a couple Americanos." And he said, "Well, how much sleep do you get?" And I said, "Well, it's hard to sleep during the day when I drank 2 Americanos to stay awake to manage these people on night shift." And his fourth question was, "How much exercise do you get?" And I said, "Well, I don't exercise much because I don't sleep very much, because I drink 2 Americanos every night to stay awake, because I'm managing 180 people on night shift. And he looked at me and he said, you seem like a really smart guy. You're going to figure this out. You don't need medicine. You don't need tests. So what else? Tell me about your time in the Philippines. What have you enjoyed about it? That was the end of this doctor's appointment. We started just talking about life. And he asked me those 4 questions. He never did a test. He never prescribed a medication. He didn't do anything. And I look back at that. And I hope this story, as your listeners, is thinking about the journey of continuous improvement. It's not always about you need a medication, you need a test, you need to figure something. It was actually that simple. In 3 minutes, he diagnosed my problem. He had helped me diagnose the problem. And he's like, you're a smart guy. You're going to figure this out. And then I was wearing a Fitbit, right? So at that point, I got Fitbit. Well, my resting heart rate before I left the corporate career and after I left the corporate career, the Fitbit, I still have a screenshot somewhere to this day where it shows my resting heart rate dropped dramatically when I went out on my own. I didn't realize the level of stress that I was putting on myself, that I was carrying in all of the things that I was doing until I saw that until I saw that Fitbit report that showed my resting heart rate dropped dramatically, 15-20% the month after I left. And which, looking back, that was part of the naiveness of saying, okay, I'm gonna go figure this out. There's been challenges along the way, right? The last 7-8 years of business, creating a software platform, finding clients, figuring out a team, all these things. There's been ups and downs, but it's been a journey.
What was the initial business model for effective performance strategies? Because I imagine it's evolved over the last 8 years, and I know it has because we'll talk about it here in a little bit.
Yeah. So the initial model really was, it was me and a laptop, and I was going around. I was subcontracting for an old boss of mine. I was working with big multinational clients, flying around the country, flying around the world even, and going and solving problems, basically doing consulting work. So that's really where it started. So I very quickly got on this treadmill of getting on an airplane on Monday morning and coming home on Friday afternoon.
Your first book was called From Orangutan to Rocket Scientist: How to Lead and Engage Your Team with Effective Process. Now, your first contact here at MoreSteam was with Gabe Turk, and Gabe told me, you have to tell me the orangutan story. I've got to hear that.
Well,
so
I'll tell you,
hear that.
If anybody's actually watching on video, you can see this guy's on my desk here. It's a stuffed orangutan, a little stuffed orangutan. And I had this guy with me at the convention, and I shared this story with Gabe. So back in my early continuous improvement career, when I was teaching Lean Six Sigma, I was teaching the traditional 4-week black belt training. And there was one particular slide that said how to change, or the 3 things need to change. And there was a triangle, and it said tools, skills, and mindset. So there's 3 things that are required to change: tools, skills, and mindset. And when I would get to that slide, here I was teaching 4 weeks of content, and I would get to this slide and I was like, I guess it's obvious, right? Like, what else are you going to say about this slide? And our twins were about 6 or 7 years old at the time. We made a trip to Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha, Nebraska. And my kids were looking at the orangutan enclosure, watching the orangutan. And I was reading a plaque on the wall about an orangutan who was no longer alive at the time, but there's this big plaque on the wall. And it talked about Fu Manchu, the orangutan, and how he kept escaping from the zoo. And the head zookeeper, the lead zookeeper, was all upset as his employees. Why are you being so careless? Why are the orangutans escaping? Why do they keep getting out of the cage? Who's being careless and leaving the doors unlocked? Until one day, one of the junior zookeepers is watching as Fu Manchu goes over to the door, starts fiddling around with the lock. The door pops open, and Fu Manchu and the other orangutans get out and run around the zoo. So it brought me back. So my kids are watching the orangutans, having fun, whatever. And I'm sitting there thinking about a PowerPoint slide. 3 things needed to change: tools, skills, and mindset. And I started thinking about Fu Manchu, and I started thinking about They sedated him, right? So he gets out of the cage, they sedate him. They're like, how is he getting out? And they found that he had taken a piece of wire from one of the lights overhead, broken it off, used that as a lockpick to get out of the cage. And then
the orangutan is doing this.
The orangutan. Yeah, the orangutan.
Wow.
So I'm like, I'm the original orangutan. I actually have an orangutan suit in my closet that I use for Halloween or stuff sometimes. I even use it for like a keynote speech sometimes. Right? Like, when we think about this, the orangutan broke off a piece of wire, opened the lock to that door with the piece of wire, and then he hid it from the zookeepers by putting it by his gum line like a retainer.
Wow.
So this is like, people can Google this. You can look up Fu Manchu the orangutan, read about this story. So he had a tool. He needed a tool to get out of the cage. That piece of wire that he took from the light. The second thing he needed was the skills. So I've often shared this story that you could give a key to a zebra. Just imagine for a moment, if you gave a key to a zebra, what would the zebra do with it?
Nothing.
He might sniff it, right? He might look at it,
Right.
but he's not doing anything with it. You could give him the key to unlock his cage. And the zebra might want to get out of his cage. He might have the tool to get out of his cage, but he doesn't have the skills. So the orangutan, Fu Manchu, had the skills and he had a tool. The third thing, the top of that pyramid, the top of that triangle was you've got to have the mindset. And when you think about Fu Manchu, if he was happy eating bananas and having someone clean up after him, which is a pretty comfortable life, if he's happy with that, he would never have gotten out of the cage. But he had such a strong mindset that not only did he find the tools, he taught himself to be a locksmith and he figured out how to get out of the cage. And so I've told this story probably dozens, maybe hundreds plus times over the past 20 plus years of my life. And so I've become known as sort of the orangutan guy, that when you think about continuous improvement, if one of those three things is missing, they took away that tool, they took away that piece of wire, and Fu Manchu never escaped again. But you need to have all three of those things. If you give your team the tools, and I've had leaders tell me, my team has the tools. If you give them the skills, we've invested in training for them. I had one CEO tell me a while back, my team just doesn't have the mindset. I give them the tools, I give them the skills. And I asked him a question I thought was going to kill me. I thought like this will be the last conversation we ever have. My question to him was, do you hire people with bad mindsets or do they get that way over time?
Wow.
And
did he just kind of pause like we just paused and he had that kind of wow moment like I just had?
Oh, he did. And then he looked at me and he's like, all right, send me that scope of work. We got to figure something out. And it's really about those three things, the tools, the skills, and the mindset. And if we don't win the hearts and minds of our employees and of our teams, then continuous improvement will continue to be elusive. We can give them tools, we can give them software, we can give them apps, we can give them training, but we've got to win their hearts as well as their minds. And that's really what it's all about.
Ryan was talking about hearts and minds, which reminds me of this quote from Martin Scorsese, the legendary filmmaker. Movies touch our hearts and awaken our vision and change the way we see things. They take us to other places. They open doors and minds. Movies are the memories of our lifetime. We need to keep them alive. I feel the very same way about this short break. MoreSteam's enterprise process improvement platform includes the tools, training, and software you need to transform your organization into a problem-solving powerhouse. Join the ranks of Fortune 500 companies that trust MoreSteam for their enterprise process improvement. Our integrated approach featuring training, project tracking and execution, simulations, and statistical analysis empowers your team to create a culture where structured problem-solving becomes second nature. Visit MoreSteam.com to learn more. And now back to my conversation with Ryan C. Weiss. One of the things I've found interesting about optics and about your approach to continuous improvement is incorporating some of the things that we can learn from Dale Carnegie. Of course, Dale Carnegie, How to, Win Friends and Influence People, one of the most famous books of the 20th century. When did you discover this, and when did you make the connection between Dale Carnegie's principles and the principles of continuous improvement?
Wow. So you really did your research, and you're taking me back in history to the things that really started building the foundation of what we've built today. And that is, I learned Dale Carnegie. So I was actually pretty introverted, despite all the stuff that we've been talking about. I was very much
And
an
you were out
introverted.
there a lot. You're running a business, you're
Yeah,
running
yeah.
for office, you're giving speeches, you're out there a lot.
I understand, but where I got my energy was like, I need some alone time. So the company I was working for at the time sent me to Dale Carnegie training. They're like, hey, you know what? Go out here, learn about communication, improve your communication skills. This will be good. And so I took the Dale Carnegie class and started. He says, one of the things that struck me about that training was, if you want to talk to people about something that's interesting or have an interesting conversation, talk to people about something that's interesting to them.
Mm.
At the same time, like, I don't know how these things happen in parallel, but at the same time I was taking that class, or really close to the same time, I started getting introduced to Lean Six Sigma. And I learned about this tool called the SIPOC. And for those of your listeners, maybe suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. And I learned about this simple framework that I think often gets minimized in Lean Six Sigma. It often is like, yeah, that's a tool you can use, or that's but I learned about it at the same time I was learning this Dale Carnegie principle, talk to people about what's interesting to them. And because I learned about those things simultaneously, I started building SIPOCs with people, and I've literally built thousands of them. And I know we've built thousands of them because we have at least hundreds of them in our software platform today. I don't know the latest count, but we've built thousands of SIPOCs. And the thing that I learned is, when I get a group of people and we build a SIPOC together, we often very quickly start to expose the pain and start to zero in on the process steps, the people considerations, and the metrics, the inputs and outputs that are causing them pain. And in fact, we once built a SIPOC with a diaper manufacturer in China in Mandarin Chinese through a translator. And at the end of about an hour and a half, the owner, I actually have a certified letter from him somewhere in my files. He said, Ryan, you understand my business better than my people.
Wow.
And I thought, how is it possible that a simple framework, suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customer, facilitated on a whiteboard in a foreign language, a language I didn't understand, through a translator, circling a few things in red, because I would look at the points when the people in the room would start arguing. They would start saying, no, that's not quite right. No. And I would circle that area in red. And at the end of it, he said, you understand where my pain is. You understand my business better than my people do. And it was simply because of this intersection of the SIPOC and the talk to people about what's interesting to them and building it with a group of people that we started zeroing in on those things. So that became the foundation of everything that we've built since then.
There are so many things that we could branch off into now as far as a conversation, because I've looked at your book. I want to talk about broken handoffs. I want to talk about clarity, alignment. I want to talk about voice of the customer and what you need in addition to that. But one of the things, because you just mentioned parallel, one of the things that I found interesting was that the customer experience should be somewhat parallel to the employee experience. Could you talk about that a little bit, since you just used the term parallel and that came to the fore of my mind?
Yeah, no, this is something I'm incredibly passionate about, is that I often find in organizations, there can be conflicts between sort of the sales and marketing process of, hey, we're out here selling and we've got these goals and we've got to sell and we've got to grow the business and that's what we're doing. And boy, I wish if only the operations team would do better at what they need to do, then we could sell more. And the parallel example is thinking about it from the operations side of an organization. The operational folks are like, boy, we've got to produce this product and we've got to, deliver this service, and we've got to do all, and we've got to engineer this solution, and we've got to do all the stuff we've got to do. If only we would get the right information from the customers and the sales team and the marketing group about what they sold, we could do a better job of what we're doing.
Mhm.
And one of the things that started to become really clear to me is that you can build a SIPOC of a customer journey map with a sales and marketing team, with the business folks in an organization about the customer journey and about the customer experience, and start understanding the pain points that are happening there. And you can also build a SIPOC with the operations folks about the operations and what are the steps that they need to take to fulfill the service, to fulfill the product requirements, to fulfill the product needs. So the SIPOC became a common framework, and it's a pretty unique thing to be able to get a sales and marketing team using the same framework as you're using with an operations team. There's
Right.
often different languages, but getting people energized in both of those parallel paths, you start to see the connections between where the sales team and the business team are frustrated and the clients are frustrated with what is breaking down in our operations and the communications with our sales team. And you start seeing that some of the suppliers and customers of those parallel paths are the other departments. And
Uh-huh.
this is the emotional connection that organizations, that teams need to make, that sales and marketing and business teams need to make with their operations team. It's where these people and process and sales and marketing and operations, it's where all of these things come together, is exactly in the SIPOC. And that's, again, why that became the foundation of everything we do.
You talk a lot about handoffs and the importance of handoffs and how handoffs get broken and how different departments within an organization are siloed from each other. And instead of a process that covers an entire organization, it's a process that's unique to that one part of the organization, and that might hinder handoffs. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I found this all fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is, well, you are getting right to the heart of what gets me excited every day. So oftentimes when people start documenting a process, they look at documenting a process within a role or within a task that needs to happen, or they might even make a process map of here's like the flow of how things need to happen. The thing that I've found is that these processes that get created and documented are often, very frequently sub-optimized to the role that's being defined, or the action or the task that needs to be completed, or the process that needs to flow. And making sure that you understand that it's not just process, it's people and process. People need to be involved in these processes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, AI is changing that to some degree, right? We're removing people from certain things, but that's a whole different topic, a whole different day. But most all organizations I'm aware of today require people and processes. And
Mm-hmm.
when teams document a process without considering the inputs and outputs, the suppliers and customers, what they're doing is they're creating a process that may or may not work for the people who need to do it, the people they need stuff from to perform it, and the people who need the outputs that process creates. And so this is one of the biggest problems I see in organizations of all sizes, is this concept of like created a process and people just need to follow it. Or I've hired the right people, now they just need to fix it and figure out what to do. What I call the intersection of people and process is where most organizations struggle. And so it's really that, what I call work streams that we're building SIPOCs around that start laying the foundation for what do we need from other people, and what do other people need from us, and what process steps need to happen so that we can effectively execute.
You have a software that's relatively recent. Am I correct?
That's great. Yeah, it's been in development over the past few years. It's been evolving. We've got live customers on it. I've been piloting it with various clients, and really starting to take off now, with clients really starting to use the full functionality of it, and so it's reached that inflection point where we're having a lot of fun with it now, where we've got lots of data happening and coming in, where people are building out their work streams, their SIPOCs, they're building out the gaps and the actions and solving those things. And so over the past few years, it's been in development and revisions and evolution. And we've gotten it to a point now where I'm really starting to have fun with it.
That's awesome. And this is a really SIPOC-focused software, correct? I mean, it's all revolves around the SIPOC.
That's
which
right.
Which is we've talked about. I mean, that's the heart of optics.
That's right. And I think that I'm not sure. Maybe somebody will send me something and say, "Oh no, this software is built around the SIPOC." But I think that we might have the only platform that's built on the foundation of the SIPOC. The SIPOCs are often, as I alluded to very early in this conversation, the SIPOC is very often taught as a tool in Six Sigma or
Right.
Lean Six Sigma that you can use with your team. You can get everybody on the same page. It's taught as a tool, and it's often shared as a template. It's like, I'm not claiming that I'm the only software platform that has a SIPOC in it. There's tons of tools and templates and SIPOCs available, but it is literally the heartbeat. It is literally the core of everything we do. And I think that's something that makes it very unique.
Where can people find out more about this software? I know you've got a website that's a pretty cool website. You want to share some information about that?
Sure. Yeah. Folks can go to learnmore.epsoptics.com. So if you go to learnmore.epsoptics.com, there's some information on there. As you mentioned early in the show, we've got a podcast, got information about the book, information about the system and the software, and even the ability to book a call with myself or one of my team members to learn more.
I will put a link to your website in the show notes along with your book and the podcast. Tell me a little bit about the podcast. Obviously, if you want to talk to something that interests me, going back to what we talked about with Dale Carnegie, tell me about your podcast.
Yeah. So the podcast really started as I was hesitant. I was like, I'm not a podcaster. I don't know what this is all about. But I started coming on some podcasts, and I realized just how passionate and how much fun I was having talking to folks about people and process. And I think there's a lot of podcasts that talk about people, human resources, and people, and finding the right people. There's a lot of podcasts talk about process and these type of things. And what I'm really passionate about is, where do these two things collide? Where do these two things intersect? And so I started on this journey of interviewing business owners and business leaders about the intersection of people and process. You've got people problems, you got process problems. How do these things collide? And what do you do to solve the problems when they collide? So I've interviewed something like 60 some business owners and leaders about that intersection of people and process.
I'm going to ask you this. In another life, I was a stand-up comedian who traveled the country doing stand-up comedy all over the country. And that's what I did. And the number one question that people always ask me is, what do you do when you bomb? They always ask me about hecklers, and they always ask me about bombing. Now, because I am asking the questions now, and I'm interested in podcasting, have you had any podcasts go wrong? Without naming names, no need to name names.
There've been a couple of them, right? I mean, when you do 60 podcasts, right, at some point you find somebody who getting them to have a conversation is like pulling teeth. Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of times where it's really tough to get the person talking, or it's really tough to and trying to figure out what their hesitation is. Are they nervous about sharing something? Are they
Hmm.
nervous about, are they just uncomfortable? So figuring out that it's like a puzzle, right? I view everything in life as a learning experience and a challenge. So like when I have those situations, it's been like, how do I draw this person out, right? What can I do to get them talking? So I've had a couple of those where it's really challenging, but I viewed it as, what do I do to solve this, right? What do I do? The human psychology is absolutely fascinating.
It's continuous improvement in podcasting. You're learning from each. I have to say, optics align people and process to accelerate performance. I bought it. Take a look at this book. Very interesting. I honestly, Ryan, I have like 7 or 8 pages of notes. I feel like I've gotten maybe a page and a quarter. I will you come back in a few months and have another conversation with me because there are so many things I would like to talk to you about that we haven't got to today.
Oh, that would be my pleasure. I sincerely appreciate it. I mean, clearly you have done your homework, you've done your research of asking some questions that have brought back some really good memories for me and really brought me back to the foundation of where a lot of this started. So it'd be my pleasure to come back and be a guest again.
Fantastic. Again, I will have the website in the show notes, the book in the show notes, the podcast in the show notes, your LinkedIn in the show notes. Anything else you'd like me to share, Ryan, before we leave here today?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, and you have definitely taken me on a journey of my past. So I just want to say thank you to you and to your audience, for the folks listening. If folks who are listening have questions, love for you to read the book, love for you to reach out and connect. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty active on LinkedIn, and we've got the podcast, and we've got a link that folks can book some time with me. And I just love going with people on journeys to solve problems. So thank you again for having me on.
No, thank you. The book is a really fun, easy read. You make a lot of these concepts very accessible. I am not an expert in process improvement. I am not an expert in Lean Six Sigma or continuous improvement. And I feel like I've taken away a lot from your book. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for listening to Quality Time with MoreSteam. You can email the show at qualitytime@moresteam.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Also, please go ahead and visit our website, moresteam.com, to learn about the software and tools that can help you solve problems, eliminate waste, and do things better. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more Quality Time with MoreSteam. Thanks again.